The Duke of Blackwood, Alistair Beaumont, considered the marriage contract on his desk with the same dispassionate interest he might afford a bill of lading for a new shipment of French brandy. It was a transaction, nothing more. The woman in question, a Miss Eleanor Vance, was a name on a list compiled by his solicitor, a name flanked by a rather astonishing figure representing her inheritance. She was, according to the terse summary, of good but unremarkable stock, possessed of a modest education, and, most critically, unburdened by the sort of cloying sentimentality that Alistair found so tiresome in the fairer sex. She was, in essence, a solvent and silent solution to a series of pressing ducal problems. He required capital to finalize the purchase of the contiguous lands bordering his own, lands that would consolidate his estate and permanently box in his insufferable rival, Lord Finch. Finch, a man of tedious ambition and flashy waistcoats, owned the neighboring property, Oakhaven, and the unspoken war between their estates was a matter of local legend. Acquiring the surrounding parcels was not merely a matter of acreage. It was a strategic masterstroke, a checkmate in a game played with deeds and surveyor's lines. Miss Vance's fortune would provide the means. Her quiet nature would provide the peace. He had met her once, a brief and formal interview arranged by their respective legal representatives. He recalled an impression of gray dress, gray eyes, a quiet stillness that was either profound composure or a complete lack of personality. He had not decided which, nor did he particularly care. She had answered his perfunctory questions with a quiet, "Yes, Your Grace," or "No, Your Grace." Her gaze fixed somewhere just past his left shoulder. She was present, and she was absent. She was there, and she was not there. It was perfectly suitable. The marriage was conducted with the same sterile efficiency. There was a church, a bishop, and a quiet breakfast. Eleanor Vance became the Duchess of Blackwood, and Alistair felt the mild satisfaction of a ledger being balanced. She moved into the cavernous ducal seat, Blackwood Manor, and settled into its vastness like a single drop of rain into the sea. She was, for all intents and purposes, invisible. And for a time, this was precisely what he wanted. He was a man of routines and obligations. His days were a fortress of meetings with his steward, political correspondence, and the meticulous management of his sprawling interests. A wife was a necessary piece of social architecture, but not one he intended to inhabit. He required her signature on certain documents, her presence at the opposite end of the dinner table, and her general, unobtrusive existence. The new Duchess provided all of this flawlessly. She was a ghost in silk, a whisper in the halls. She managed her new station with a placid competence that demanded nothing of him. He would see her across the lawn, walking through the gardens, her head bent as if in study of the gravel path. He would pass her in a corridor, and she would offer a small, correct curtsy, her eyes downcast. At meals, she was a silent companion, eating with a delicate precision that was as unobtrusive as her conversation. He had purchased a wife, and he had received precisely what he had paid for. A quiet, well-mannered fixture, a portrait that breathed. His first inkling that the frame might contain more than a simple sketch came on a Tuesday afternoon. He was in his study, wrestling with a set of surveyor's reports concerning the manor's east wing, a magnificent but crumbling relic of a more ostentatious era. The wing was subsiding. The reports were a contradictory mess of technical jargon and exorbitant estimates. He had been staring at the same diagram for an hour, a headache building behind his eyes, when a soft knock came at the door. It was she, the Duchess. She stood in the doorway, a book held loosely in one hand. She never sought him out. Her presence was an anomaly, a disruption to the established order of their separate orbits. "Your Grace," she said, her voice as soft as he remembered. "I apologize for the intrusion." He grunted, a sound that could be interpreted as permission to continue. She stepped inside, her gaze falling not on him, but on the chaotic spread of papers on his desk. "I happened to be in the library," she began, "and I came across a folio on architectural stresses. It was lodged behind the works of Plutarch. It seems to have belonged to your grandfather, the fifth Duke. It details the construction of the East Wing." Alistair stared at her. His grandfather had been a keen amateur engineer, a fact Alistair had forgotten, if he had ever truly known it. Eleanor moved closer, her finger hovering over one of the surveyor's diagrams. "They are mistaken here," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of confidence. "They assume the primary load is borne by the southern buttress. But your grandfather employed a cantilevered truss system hidden within the roof structure. The subsidence is not from the foundation. It is from the decay of the king post. A simple repair, if one knows where to look. They are proposing to rebuild the entire foundation. It is unnecessary and ruinously expensive." She tapped the diagram decisively. Her finger was slender, unadorned, save for the heavy gold of her wedding band. He looked from her finger to her face. For the first time, he noticed the clarity of her gray eyes, the focused intelligence that sharpened their depths. He saw not a void, but a deep, still pool. He was momentarily speechless. He had assumed her mind was a quiet, empty room. He now suspected it was a library, and he had not even known the door was unlocked. "I see," he said, his own voice sounding hollow and inadequate. He cleared his throat. "Thank you, Duchess. I will have my man look into it." She simply nodded, turned, and left, closing the door with a soft click. He was left alone with the papers, the silence, and a profound sense of dislocation. He felt as though a piece of furniture had just offered him sound financial advice. It was unsettling. He examined the old folio she had mentioned. She was, of course, entirely correct. Her observation saved him a fortune that dwarfed her own dowry. Section. A week later, his steward, Mr. Henderson, a man not given to effusive praise, requested a meeting. He was holding the household ledgers. "Your Grace," Henderson began, a look of bewildered admiration on his face. "Her Grace, the Duchess, requested to review the accounts." Alistair stiffened. "And you allowed it?" "She did not seem a woman to whom one says no, Your Grace. Not in a matter of household efficiency." Henderson cleared his throat. "She has reorganized them, consolidated our suppliers, renegotiated the contracts for coal and wax. The projected savings for the next fiscal year are substantial." He slid a summary across the desk. The figure at the bottom was stark and impressive. Alistair looked at the number. He thought of the East Wing. He thought of the quiet woman who walked the gardens. He was an astute man. He understood balance sheets and strategic acquisitions. He was beginning to suspect he had profoundly miscalculated the value of his most recent one. He had acquired a duchess, but it seemed he had also acquired a master strategist, an architect, and a chancellor of the exchequer, all wrapped in a package of quiet gray silk. He did not thank her. He did not mention it. To do so would be to admit his own ignorance, to acknowledge that she was more than the silent partner he had contracted for. It would require a recalibration of their entire dynamic, and he was not ready for that. It was easier to pretend it had not happened. It was easier to maintain the comfortable fiction of his own supreme competence. So he continued to see her as a function, a presence. Her efficiencies became part of the background hum of the manor, a quiet thrum of improvement that he absorbed without comment. The food tasted better, the fires burned brighter, the staff seemed more content. The entire estate ran with a new and silent precision. Blackwood Manor had always been a house. Under her invisible hand, it was beginning to feel like a home. But he did not have the language or the inclination to acknowledge the architect of this change. He was a duke. He was in control. He had made a good marriage. That was all there was to it. The incident occurred, as such things often do, in public. It was a dinner party, a tedious but politically necessary affair. Alistair had gathered a collection of influential peers and members of Parliament, men whose support was crucial for an upcoming vote. And, unfortunately, he had been forced to invite Lord Finch. Finch was in his element, loud and preening, his waistcoat a violent shade of peacock blue. He held court at his end of the table, his voice booming over the clatter of silver. Alistair watched him, a familiar irritation tightening his jaw. The main topic of conversation, steered deliberately by Finch, was the matter of the Oakhaven estate and the lands Alistair was so keen to acquire. "A man's estate is his legacy, Blackwood," Finch declared, loud enough for the entire table to hear. "One must guard it jealously. Some of us build our fortunes. Others, it seems, must marry them." A wave of polite, uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the guests. It was a direct hit, a clear reference to Alistair's recent and very practical marriage. Alistair's hand tightened on his wineglass. He could feel the eyes of his guests upon him, waiting for his response. His gaze swept the table and landed, as if by cruel magnetic force, on his wife. Eleanor sat at the far end, a silent statue amidst the noise. She had not said a word all evening. Her stillness, which he had once valued, now felt like a liability. It felt like a vacuum, an absence of support. In his moment of social peril, she was a void. She was not helping. She was not playing the game. Finch followed his gaze and smiled, a thin, predatory expression. "Your Duchess is a woman of remarkable composure, Blackwood. A lesson to us all in the virtues of silence. The quiet mice, they say, shall inherit the earth, or at least their husbands shall." The insult was twofold, directed at both her supposed meekness and his own financial motivations. The barb struck home. Alistair felt a surge of cold fury, misdirected and potent. It was aimed at Finch, but it splashed onto the nearest, most convenient target. He was being made a fool of, and his silent, gray wife was an accomplice to his humiliation. He turned his head slowly, deliberately, fixing his gaze on her. The entire table held its breath. The air grew thick and heavy. "My dear," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a shard of ice. "You will speak when spoken to." It was a statement of ownership, a command, a public branding of her status in his world. The words hung in the air, brutal and irrevocable. A collective, silent gasp seemed to pass through the room. Even Finch looked momentarily taken aback by the sheer, unvarnished cruelty of the remark. Eleanor's reaction was a masterpiece of negation. She did not flinch. She did not blush or stammer. Her expression did not change. For a single, protracted beat, her gray eyes met his across the long, polished expanse of the dining table. He had expected to see hurt, or fear, or anger. He saw none of those things. He saw a profound and unnerving stillness, a depth he could not read. It was like looking into a well and seeing no reflection. Then, with a grace that was almost unnervingly deliberate, She placed her silver fork and knife parallel on her plate. She folded her linen napkin and set it beside them. She took a final, slow sip of water. She rose from her chair, her movements fluid and unhurried. Her spine was perfectly straight. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to the table at large, a gesture of such cool and distant politeness that it was more dismissive than any angry retort could ever have been. And then she turned and walked from the room. Her footsteps made no sound on the thick Aubusson carpet. A door closed quietly somewhere in the house. The silence she left behind was louder than the insult. It was a screaming, echoing void that consumed all the air in the room. Alistair felt a cold dread begin to seep into his bones, a feeling he could not name, but which felt horribly like a premonition. He had intended to assert his authority. He had a sinking feeling he had just committed an act of catastrophic self-sabotage. He had won the moment, but he was certain he had just lost something of infinitely greater value. The next morning, her chair at the breakfast table was empty. Alistair told himself she was indulging in a fit of pique. It was to be expected. Women were prone to such displays. He ate his toast in stony silence, the clink of his spoon against the porcelain of his cup sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. She was absent at luncheon as well, and at dinner. A day passed, then two. He did not see her. He did not hear her. He did not ask after her, for to do so would be an admission of concern, a concession of error. His pride was a fortress, and its walls were high. He told himself he was teaching her a lesson, that she would emerge from her rooms suitably chastened, and the proper order of things would be restored. But the proper order of things began to fray at the edges. It began with small things. The floral arrangements, which had been a constant and subtle source of beauty in the main rooms, were gone. The vases stood empty, gathering a thin film of dust. The meals, while still prepared by the same excellent cook, seemed to lack a certain finesse, a balance he had grown accustomed to. The selection of wines with dinner became less inspired, more predictable. He started to notice sounds by their absence, the faint rustle of her skirts in the corridor, the soft turning of pages from the library late at night, a sound that had been a quiet counterpoint to his own solitude. The vast house, which she had filled with her silent competence, began to feel empty again. It was reverting to its former state, a magnificent, soulless collection of rooms. The warmth she had invisibly cultivated was leaching away, day by day. He found himself looking for her. His eyes would drift to the chair she favored in the morning room, the one with the good light for reading. The chair was just a chair, an inanimate object of wood and damask. But its emptiness was a physical presence. It was a reproach. He had commanded her to be silent, and she had obeyed him with a terrifying totality. She had vanished. He was present, and she was absent. He was there, and she was not there. The atmosphere in the house grew heavy, oppressive. The staff were quiet, their faces carefully blank, but he could feel their watchfulness, their judgment. Blackwood Manor was holding its breath, waiting. He was the Duke. He was the master of this domain. And yet, he felt like a visitor in his own home, a stranger to its subtle, newly broken rhythms. He was adrift. The catalyst, when it came, was quiet and unexpected. It was Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, a woman who had served his family for 40 years and who possessed a spine of iron and the observational skills of a field marshal. She found him one evening staring into the fire in his study, a glass of untouched brandy in his hand. She did not knock, She simply entered, carrying a fresh log for the fire. "It is a cold night, Your Grace," she said, her voice neutral. "Indeed," he replied, not looking at her. She placed the log on the grate with a soft thud. "The house feels the cold more than it used to," she continued, her back to him. "It has lost its heart, I think." She paused. "A house needs a mistress, Your Grace. Not just a signature on a document, but a presence, a guiding hand. This house, it misses its duchess." Her words were simple. They were not an accusation. They were a statement of fact, as plain and solid as the oak log she had just placed on the fire. But they struck him with the force of a physical blow. The house misses its duchess. It was the permission he needed to admit the truth to himself. He missed her. He, Alistair Beaumont, Duke of Blackwood, a man who valued solitude and prized his own self-sufficiency, missed the quiet, gray woman he had married for her money. He missed her silence. He missed her unobtrusive competence. He missed the way the house felt when she was in it. He felt a sudden, desperate need to see her, to break the suffocating silence. He left his study and went to her wing of the house, to the drawing room she had claimed as her own. He had never been inside. He knocked, a sharp rap of his knuckles against the wood. There was no answer. He hesitated for a moment, then turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room was not empty, but she was not in it. It was, however, profoundly, unmistakably hers. It was a space of quiet order and deep thought. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled not with novels but with volumes on agriculture, botany, finance, and engineering. Maps were pinned to a large corkboard, detailing the drainage patterns of the Blackwood estate. It was a strategist's war room, disguised as a ladies' parlor. On a large desk in the center of the room, amidst neatly stacked papers, lay a single, folded copy of the London Times. An article on the financial page was circled in ink. The headline was stark: "Lord Finch facing ruin. Oakhaven estate to be sold to cover debts." Alistair's blood ran cold. He had heard rumors of Finch's financial troubles, but he had dismissed them as wishful thinking. Beside the newspaper was a thick stack of legal documents bound in ribbon. On top of the stack was a letter from a firm of solicitors he recognized, Eleanor's own, a Mr. Davies. And beside that, lying stark and separate on the polished mahogany, was a deed. He picked it up. His hands trembled slightly. The document was heavy, official. He read the words, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. It was the deed to the Oakhaven estate, and the name of the new owner was not his. It read, "Eleanor Vance, Duchess of Blackwood." The epiphany struck him then, a blinding flash of understanding that was both illuminating and agonizing. He stood in the center of her private world, a world he had never bothered to discover, and he finally saw. He saw it all. Her quiet walks in the garden were not idle strolls. They were inspections. Her long hours in the library were not for entertainment. They were for research. Her silence at the dinner table was not meekness. It was observation. She had been gathering information, assessing the terrain, analyzing the weaknesses of her husband's enemy. He thought about her intelligence with the architectural plans. He thought about her sharp reorganization of the household accounts. He thought about the cool, unreadable look in her eyes after his insult. It had not been hurt. It had been assessment. It had been the quiet closing of a door, the final calculation before a decisive move. She had not been a quiet mouse cowering in a corner. She had been a general, watching the battle from a high hill. waiting for the perfect moment to deploy her reserves. While he had been posturing and preening, playing the grand aristocrat, she had been quietly, efficiently, and ruthlessly conquering his rival. She had not just bought an estate, she had won the war. His war, and she had done it with her own money, her own intellect, and her own silent strategy. You will speak when spoken to. The memory of his own words filled him with a shame so profound it was a physical sickness. He felt its heat rise in his face, its weight settle in his gut. He had taken this brilliant, formidable woman, this queen on the chessboard of his life, and he had treated her like a pawn. He had not just insulted her, he had revealed his own staggering, catastrophic blindness. He had looked at a diamond and seen only a dull, gray stone. He had never been more wrong about anything or anyone in his entire life. He left her study, the deed still clutched in his hand. He knew, with an instinct that went deeper than thought, that she would not be at Blackwood. She had won her prize. She would have gone to claim it. He rode for Oakhaven himself, without a groom, pushing his horse harder than he should have. The wind whipped at his face, but it could not scour the shame from his soul. He rode not as a duke going to inspect a new acquisition, but as a supplicant, a fool going to beg wisdom from the oracle he had failed to recognize in his own house. Oakhaven was in a state of genteel decay, a testament to Finch's neglect. But as he rode up the main drive, he saw the first signs of a new order. The overgrown lawns were being scythed by a team of workmen. A glazier was replacing a broken window in the facade. There was a quiet hum of purposeful activity. He found her in the walled garden. It was a wreck, a beautiful ruin of collapsed trellises and weed-choked flower beds. And in the center of it all stood Eleanor, his duchess. She was not dressed in silk and lace. She wore a simple, practical dress of dark wool, with her sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Her hands were smudged with dirt. She was pointing to a section of crumbling brickwork, giving quiet, clear instructions to a stonemason. She looked up as he approached, her expression calm, unreadable. She was not surprised to see him. It was as if she had been expecting him all along. He dismounted and walked toward her, the dead leaves crunching under his boots. He stopped a few feet away, holding the deed in his hand. The workmen, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, faded tactfully into the background. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for what felt like the first time. He saw the strength in her posture, the intelligence in her clear gray eyes, the quiet authority with which she commanded this small army of restoration. He saw the woman who had saved his ancestral home and vanquished his rival, all while he had been treating her as little more than a decorative object. He had rehearsed a dozen apologies, 100 excuses. They all turned to ash in his mouth. They were inadequate. They were insults. There was only one thing to be said. He held out the deed. "This is yours," he said. His voice was raw. She did not take it. "I know," she said simply. The quiet finality of her words unmanned him. He had come here to make a grand gesture, to bestow upon her what was already hers. The depth of his foolishness was bottomless. "I was wrong," he said, the words tasting strange and necessary. "About everything. About you." He took a breath, forcing himself to meet her steady gaze. "I saw you as a solution, a convenience, a name in a ledger. I married your fortune, and I ignored the woman who came with it. I looked at you, but I never saw you. Not until you were gone. Not until the house grew cold, and I found this." He gestured with the deed, then let his hand fall to his side. My blindness does not excuse my cruelty. What I said to you, it was unforgivable. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not deserve it. He simply stated the truth of his own failure. Oakhaven is yours, he repeated, his voice quieter now. A testament to your brilliance. I will not contest it. I will not ask for it. It is your victory. She watched him for a long moment, her head tilted slightly. He could see the thoughts turning behind her eyes, the careful weighing of his words, his posture, his sincerity. "And what will you do now, Your Grace?" she asked. Her tone was not cold, but it was not warm either. It was analytical. It was a test. He knew it. He had to give the right answer, and the right answer could not be about what he wanted from her. It had to be about what he was prepared to change in himself. "I am going to London," he said, the decision forming as he spoke it. "There is a trade bill before the House. Finch supported it. I have been his chief opponent for no other reason than that he was its champion. I am going to withdraw my opposition. I am going to speak in favor of it." Her eyebrows rose, just slightly. It would be a public humiliation. A complete reversal of his stated position. It would cost him political capital and make him look weak and vacillating to his peers. "Why?" she asked. "Because my opposition was based on pride and rivalry, not on merit," he said. "It is time I started making decisions based on what is right, not on who I wish to inconvenience." It was an act of public atonement for a private sin. It was the only currency he had to offer. He turned to leave, to give her the space he had never granted her before. "I will have my solicitors draw up whatever documents are necessary to ensure Oakhaven is yours, free and clear of any claim from me or my estate." "That will not be necessary," she said, her voice stopping him. "My solicitor is more than competent." Of course he was. He felt another flush of shame. He bowed his head, a gesture of defeat and respect. Of course. He walked back to his horse, his shoulders heavy. He had said what he needed to say. He had confessed his failure. The rest was up to her. As he mounted, he looked back. She was still standing there, watching him, a solitary, determined figure in the heart of the beautiful ruin she was already bringing back to life. Eleanor did not return to Blackwood. She remained at Oakhaven, and Alistair, true to his word, respected her domain. He went to London and did exactly as he had promised. He rose in the House of Lords and spoke in favor of Finch's bill, citing new information and the importance of progress over personal animosity. The political world was stunned. His allies were confused, his enemies gleeful. Lord Finch, already humbled by financial ruin, was rendered utterly irrelevant. Alistair had, in a strange way, given his rival a final, posthumous victory, and in doing so, had asserted a new kind of power, the power to admit error. He returned to Blackwood, to the cold, quiet house. Her absence was a constant, aching presence. He began a new kind of routine. He started to court his own wife. He did not send flowers or jewels. Such gestures were transactional, the currency of the man he no longer wished to be. Instead, he sent her a book, a rare first edition on the cultivation of heirloom roses he found in a dusty London bookshop, with a simple note, "For the garden at Oakhaven." He sent her a letter a few days later. It was not an apology. It was an observation. He described the way the light fell across the south lawn in the morning, a detail he had never noticed before. He wrote about a conversation he'd had with one of the tenant farmers and an idea for crop rotation he thought she might find interesting. He was, in his own stilted way, showing her that he was learning to see. He was learning to pay attention. He began to visit Oakhaven. He did not arrive unannounced. He sent a note asking if it would be convenient for him to call upon her. He was asking for permission to enter her world. She granted it. Their first meetings were formal, conducted in the half-restored drawing room at Oakhaven. But slowly, the setting shifted. He found her in the gardens, and instead of watching from a distance, he took off his coat and helped her clear a patch of thorny overgrowth. He got dirt on his hands and a scratch on his cheek. They worked in silence for a time, a shared, purposeful quiet that was entirely different from the empty silence that had once defined their marriage. Then they began to talk, truly talk. She asked him about the political maneuvering in London, and her questions were sharp, insightful, cutting to the heart of the matter. She saw the patterns and motivations he had missed. He, in turn, asked her about her plans for Oakhaven, for the land, for the gardens. He listened. He learned about her childhood, her quiet, observant youth, the unexpected inheritance that had given her freedom, but not a voice. He discovered her humor, a dry, intelligent wit that emerged in brief, sparkling flashes. One afternoon, as he struggled to untangle a stubborn root, he swore in frustration. "I believe," she said, without looking up from her own task, "that particular weed requires a more nuanced approach than brute force and profanity, Your Grace." He stopped, looked at her, and saw the faint ghost of a smile on her lips. And he laughed. It was a real, unrestrained laugh, a sound he had not made in years. It was the sound of thawing ice. He was not rebuilding a marriage. He was building a new one from the foundations up. He was discovering the woman he had married, and in doing so, he was discovering a part of himself he had not known existed. A man capable of admiration, of respect, of a deep and burgeoning tenderness. He was falling in love with his wife. The day came when the gardens at Oakhaven were no longer a ruin, but a place of planned and cultivated beauty. The house was restored, its windows gleaming, its woodwork polished. It was her creation, a symbol of her agency and vision. They were walking along a newly graveled path as the sun set, casting long shadows across the lawn. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and blooming roses. "It is beautiful," he said, looking at the house. "What you have done here." "It had good bones," she replied. "It simply needed to be seen for what it could be." The parallel was unspoken, but it hung in the air between them. He stopped and turned to face her. "Eleanor," he said, using her given name for the first time without the formal buffer of her title. "Come home." It was not a command. It was a plea. "Blackwood is just a house," he said, struggling to find the words. "A grand and empty one. It needs you, not just your efficiency or your intelligence. It needs your presence. I need you." She looked at him, her gray eyes searching his. He did not try to hide what he was feeling. He let her see the vulnerability, the hope, the profound and sincere ache of his regret and his love. "Blackwood is your home, Alistair," she said softly. "Oakhaven is mine. A wife should be with her husband, but a woman must have a room of her own." He understood. This was the final term of their new contract: partnership, equality, respect for her autonomy. "Then we shall have two homes," he said, his heart soaring with a relief so vast it almost buckled his knees. "And we shall inhabit them together." She smiled, a true, radiant smile that transformed her face, chasing away the last of the gray and filling her with a light he had been blind to for so long. "I think," she said, "that is a very sensible arrangement." A year later, The Duke and Duchess of Blackwood were a subject of quiet fascination in society. They were a formidable partnership. They divided their time between the impeccably run Blackwood Manor and the stunningly restored Oakhaven estate. The Duchess, once considered a mousy non-entity, was now regarded as a woman of formidable intellect and quiet power. Her opinions on matters from agriculture to finance were sought after, and it was widely understood that the Duke consulted his wife on all matters of importance. The east wing of Blackwood Manor was fully restored, its ingenious cantilevered trusses a silent monument to the woman who had saved it. The lands that had once been a source of conflict now formed a single, sprawling, prosperous domain, jointly managed by the Duke and his Duchess. One evening, they sat in the Blackwood Library, a comfortable silence between them. He was reading a ministerial brief, a furrow of concentration on his brow. He lowered the paper. "What do you make of this clause on tariffs?" he asked, passing it to her. She read it, her brow knitting for a moment. "It is a trap," she said finally. "It seems to grant a concession, but this subclause here, it creates a loophole that renders the entire agreement meaningless. They are counting on you to see the gift, not the poison hidden within it." He read it again, seeing it now through her eyes. She was right, of course. He shook his head in admiration. "How did you see that?" "I have learned," she said, her eyes meeting his with a hint of her dry wit, "that it is always wise to read the fine print." He reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. Her fingers curled around his, a familiar, comforting gesture. At that moment, a new sound drifted down from the upper floor, the thin, demanding cry of a baby. Their son. Eleanor smiled. "It seems the heir requires a renegotiation of his sleeping arrangements." Alistair rose and pulled her to her feet. "Then we shall go and hear his terms." Later that night, as Eleanor slept beside him, Alistair lay awake, watching the moonlight stream through the window. He thought of the man he had been, arrogant, blind, emotionally bankrupt. He had thought power was in his title, his land, his wealth. He had been a fool. True power, he now understood, was in partnership. It was in seeing the person beside you, in all their complexity and brilliance. His life had not truly begun when he inherited his title. It had begun the moment he had finally learned to see his wife. He had sought a silent fixture and had, by some miracle of grace he would never deserve, found the entire world.